was a landmark study that was published all the way back in 1997. Okay, so we're talking like close to 30 years ago in the journal called Diabetes. It was conducted in China with type 2 diabetic patients, and it compared 200 micrograms per day against 1,000 micrograms per day, 5 times as much. The result at the 1,000 microgram dose were significantly better compared to the 200 microgram in these categories: fasting blood glucose, 2-hour glucose tolerance, insulin levels, and A1C levels. The long-term blood sugar marker that is the one that is kind of the gold standard marker for diabetes. Every single one of those categories, the 1,000 micrograms, were significantly better, even though the 200 microgram group showed modest results. The 1,000 microgram group showed excellent results. That study essentially established that if you want chromium to move the needle metabolically, you really need to be working in a range of at least 500 to 1,000 micrograms per day. And personally, based on the other studies that have been done and based on my own experience with real people using this stuff, 1,000 to 1,500 micrograms is where I always come out as an optimal dose of chromium. Welcome to Vitality Radio, the podcast that helps you make sense of natural supplements and thrive without pharma drugs. I'm Jared St. Clair. I grew up in a health food store and spent over 40 years now figuring out what works and what doesn't, so that you can make confident, informed decisions about nutrition, supplements, and your health. Here's a question for you. What if the nutrient most associated with blood sugar and metabolism has been dosed wrong for decades? Not a little wrong, but like significantly wrong. Say 5 to 15 times less than what is actually needed. Chromium has been in the supplement world for a long time. In fact, I've been in the supplement world for a long time, and I remember when chromium was the biggest supplement in the supplement world. It was huge in the late 80s. It was originally patented, the first form called chromium picolinate in the early 80s, and then eventually became one of the best-selling supplements in really the history of the industry, but especially back in the 80s and 90s, it was absolutely massive. And it's still sold a lot today. But most of the doses that you'll find on store shelves are based on research that was very early, when they didn't really know what the upper limits were as far as safety goes. And the results were very compelling, even at those lower doses. But things have changed since then as far as the research and not so much as far as the dosing. And I want to see if I can help you get to the bottom of all that so you can understand it better. Today, I plan to educate you on what I consider to be one of the most important of what I call the mighty minerals. That's what this series is called. And it's the reason I'm starting with chromium is because this is one that is almost universal. It's certainly not a supplement that everybody needs a significant dose of, but I think everybody should be taking it on a daily basis, which is why it's represented in my Ultimate Vitality Multi, and that's how it fits into my Vital 5. But I'm going to talk about why you might want more than what's in a multivitamin and who this applies to. And one of the things that I love about chromium is it is super, super effective. And it is very, very inexpensive, which is one of the best things about this supplement. So before we get into it, I want to say something that applies to the entire Mighty Minerals series, and it's worth repeating, at least as we're starting out. Chromium actually does have what's called a reference intake, or an RDA. It's one of the few minerals in this series that actually is going to have one, because you're going to see a lot of minerals in this series that the FDA has essentially just said, yeah, we don't know if you should take it or not, or how much. But here's the thing. Having a number on paper doesn't mean the number reflects what your body needs to thrive. There's a massive difference between the amount required to avoid deficiency and the amount that actually supports optimal function. Modern nutrition science is increasingly recognizing that the gap is real here, even if the government guidelines haven't always caught up. The adequate intake for chromium was set based on estimated average consumption, not on clinical outcomes. That's really, really important. Not what actually moves the needle in real people when it comes to their blood sugar, because that's where chromium shines, is blood sugar, insulin sensitivity, all these things that we hear about that make us metabolically unhealthy. So today, we're not going to talk about minimums. We're going to talk about optimum. Why does chromium matter? Chromium is what's called an essential trace mineral, meaning your body requires it but cannot manufacture it on its own. You have to get it from food or from supplements. And while it's technically present in a lot of foods, the amount in foods is pretty small. Bioavailability varies considerably, and modern food processing and soil depletion have made it harder than ever to consistently get meaningful amounts from diet alone. I know that drum's been beat a lot, but it just simply is modern life. Here's why this matters right now. We're living in the middle of a metabolic health crisis: blood sugar dysregulation, insulin resistance, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes. These aren't fringe health issues. They affect the majority of American adults and many American children in some form. And chromium sits right at the center of that conversation because one of its primary jobs in the human body is to help insulin do its job. When chromium is adequate, insulin works more efficiently. When it's low, and a significant portion of the population is running low, the body has to produce more insulin to get the same result. That's the beginning of a very long, very slow decline in metabolic health. And most people never connect it to something as simple as a trace mineral that they've been underdosing or ignoring entirely. So, what does chromium actually do in the body? Physiologically, it's fascinating. It makes everything else in this episode make a lot more sense. So, let me break it down for you. Chromium's most important role is its involvement in what researchers call the glucose tolerance factor, or GTF. In fact, you'll often see on supplement labels GTF chromium. It's a biologically active complex that forms in your body and acts as a kind of cofactor for insulin. Think of insulin as a key that's supposed to unlock your cells and allow glucose to enter. GTF chromium is like the mechanism that makes the lock work properly. Without enough chromium to support GTF activity, insulin is less effective. Your cells become less responsive to it, and blood sugar management suffers. You can think of it, you've heard me talk a lot about vitamin K2 and how K2 kind of unlocks the ability for calcium to get into the bones, into the teeth. So, not the same mechanism, but a very similar idea with chromium when it comes to insulin. Beyond blood sugar, chromium, though, also plays a role in lipid metabolism. Researchers have linked adequate chromium status to healthier triglyceride and HDL cholesterol levels. It's involved in protein metabolism as well, which is part of why you'll sometimes see it in formulas targeting body composition. There's also emerging evidence around chromium's role in the brain, specifically in serotonin activity and appetite regulation, which may explain why some people notice improvements in carbohydrate cravings when they start using chromium at meaningful doses. And I can't tell you how many times over the years that's exactly what happens. People say, when I started taking enough chromium, and we'll talk about what enough is here in just a second, I started noticing a difference in sugar cravings, and also my blood sugar started balancing out. So chromium has always been something that is necessary to the human body to optimize insulin utilization. Like, that hasn't changed. What has changed is we have blunted our insulin cell receptors by excess sugar, excess carbohydrates, and we've also reduced the ability for the body to utilize the insulin that we're making by getting less chromium because of soil depletion and food refining practices. So it's a pretty significant double-edged sword there. And something worth understanding is that chromium doesn't work in isolation. It's like every other nutrient in the body. It's synergistic with other nutrients, particularly the B vitamins, and especially niacin, which, as you'll hear in a few minutes, plays a very direct role in how the best forms of chromium actually work. So, chromium deficiency is one of those things that's hard to pin down clinically because there's no reliable standard blood test that accurately reflects tissue level chromium status. That makes it very easy to overlook, and you're almost never going to have a physician say, hey, you should probably consider chromium based on your blood work. The most recognizable patterns, though, that you can look for are blood sugar instability, the kind that shows up as energy crashes after meals, strong carbohydrate and sugar cravings, difficulty losing weight despite eating reasonably well, and that mid afternoon slump that sends people reaching for coffee or something sweet. These are classic signs that insulin sensitivity may be compromised, and chromium is one of the first places a functional nutritionist should look when it comes to sensitivity issues. Several factors accelerate chromium depletion. High sugar and refined carbohydrate diets are a big one. Every time your blood sugar spikes, your body excretes more chromium, and your depleted level that you probably already are dealing with becomes even more depleted. So people who arguably need the most chromium are often the very people whose diets are pulling it out of them the fastest. Stress is another factor. Physical and emotional stress both increase chromium loss over through the urine. Exercise increases demand as well, which is why athletes are often functionally low as well. And as we age, both absorption and retention of chromium tend to decline. So this is an interesting combination. Basically, the most athletic among us are probably deficient in chromium, and perhaps the least healthy, the ones with the most metabolic dysfunction, are also significantly low in chromium. So it's kind of both ends of the spectrum. And it's, we talk about magnesium and stress. Well, chromium and stress as well, same kind of thing. Certain medications also are worth noting when it comes to chromium because corticosteroids and some antacids, particularly PPIs that I'm constantly telling you are so not good for us, interfere with chromium absorption and it can also increase excretion over time. So basically, clinical deficiency is a lot bigger deal than we probably think. And it makes sense because, again, remember, people who are metabolically unhealthy, which is a high percentage of Americans, I think the estimates now are that it's something like 60% of us are considered metabolically unhealthy and having some level of insulin issues. And then the most athletic and physically fit among us are also probably depleted. So it's most of us is basically what I'm getting to. Now, chromium is found in a wide variety of foods: broccoli, green beans, grape juice, whole grains, beef, and certain spices like black pepper are among the best dietary sources. Broccoli is actually one of the highest chromium foods that you can eat, which is just one more reason it shows up on, so many nutritionists kind of top hit list, along with the fact that it's a cruciferous vegetable that helps to detoxify estrogen and things like that. The challenge is that even a well-constructed diet typically provides between like 20 and 50 micrograms of chromium per day. And a standard chromium supplement and the RDA for chromium is 200 micrograms per day. So you're already like 4 to 10 times less potent than we need from our diets. So that's the gap. But that's the gap based on the RDA, not the gap based on the optimal. And we'll talk about the optimal here in just a minute. And then, of course, as I said, there's soil depletion. So maybe it's even lower than that. So then who might actually benefit the most from chromium? And then we'll talk about how to utilize it. The most obvious group is anyone navigating blood sugar challenges: prediabetes, A1C levels in the fives, type 2 diabetes, A1C levels in the high fives and sixes and beyond, or anybody with insulin resistance, stubborn weight that they're having a hard time getting off, anybody that has any kind of sugar cravings on a consistent basis, carbohydrate cravings on a consistent basis. Chromium should absolutely be part of the conversation there. The other people would be, again, anybody that is an athlete. Active people have higher chromium needs due to the combination of physical stress and sweat loss. And if you're training consistently and not supplementing with chromium, then there's a good chance you're actually running low. And then anybody who's looking to optimize body composition levels. If you feel like your BMI, your fat percentage versus lean mass needs help, then chromium is something to consider for sure. I'd also like to flag women going through perimenopause and menopause, because the metabolic shifts that happen during that transition, increasing insulin resistance, changes in body composition, that extra 5, 10, 15 pounds that so many women complain about, and blood sugar volatility, that all creates a context where chromium becomes more relevant. I see this pattern a lot, and chromium is often a meaningful piece of that puzzle. And then the other group would be women experiencing PCOS, because insulin resistance, of course, is tied in very deeply. And I'm working on an episode where we're going to talk about PCOS in a lot more detail here very soon. Now, the forms of chromium, I call this the picolinate problem because the marketing on chromium picolinate is so strong that most people will actually not just say chromium, they'll actually say chromium picolinate when they talk about chromium, the supplement, as if it is that is what chromium is. You know, from your education you've received here and other places about magnesium, that there are many forms: magnesium citrate, magnesium glycinate, bisglycinate, threonate, and so on. The same can be said about chromium. Lots of options out there. But chromium picolinate had the best marketing budget, really is what it boils down to. And I want to spend some time really explaining what I consider to be some misinformation in this space. People have been led to believe that chromium picolinate is the be all end all of chromium, and I'm about to tell you why I disagree with that. You walk into most any supplement store, including mine, and you will find chromium picolinate on the shelf. It's everywhere. It's in grocery stores. I think they sell it at Costco. It's all over the place. And we do sell it at Vitality Nutrition. There are some people who absolutely want chromium picolinate, and chromium picolinate delivers results. So I don't have a problem with it necessarily. I just think there's better options. For a long time, it has been considered the gold standard by most people. And I just simply don't think that's true. For the last probably 20 years, I've been telling people a different story. But let's talk about the history of it. Back in the 80s and 90s, as I said, when chromium was massive, we think about like berberine right now or ashwagandha, how huge those things are. Or let's just take magnesium. Magnesium, the number one selling mineral now. Well, there was a time when chromium outsold magnesium. That's how big of a deal chromium was in the 80s and 90s. And there was a guy named Gary Evans, who was a researcher who held patents on it and funded a significant portion of the early research on the picolinate form specifically. So picolinate became like the Kleenex of, tissue paper, right? So here's the issue. Picolinic acid is what chromium was bound to, and that was smart because they were taking chromium, which is very poorly absorbed on its own, chelating it with an acid to help the body to absorb it. Nothing wrong with that, and I'm so grateful that that happened because that's when we learned how effective chromium supplementation could be. So it does work to help absorb the product, but the same property that helps with the absorption of chromium actually raises some questions. Several cell studies have suggested that chromium picolinate may generate oxidative byproducts at higher doses. Some research has also indicated that picolinate competes with iron for absorption. We don't want that. We want to let iron absorb. That's a tough one for us to absorb anyway. None of this means chromium picolinate is dangerous at normal supplemental doses, but it does mean that the best form narrative was built more on marketing than on rigorous comparative science. And I call that the picolinate problem. Now let's talk about the form that I believe is superior and the form that I use in my Ultimate Vitality Multi and my most recent formula, the GLP-1 Metabolic Optimizer. This is what's called a niacin-bound chromium. It's actually chromium, the mineral, bound to a vitamin. That's a different way of doing it. That's not typical, but in this case, it works. It's known as chromium polynicotinate or chromium nicotinate. And so the chromium polynicotinate is my very favorite form of chromium. It's just chromium bound to nicotinic acid, otherwise known as niacin, vitamin B3, and that's what is represented in the supplements that I add chromium to. And here's why this matters. Remember, we talked about glucose tolerance factor, or GTF? That's the biologically active chromium complex that your body actually uses. GTF chromium naturally contains niacin as part of its structure. Chromium polynicotinate is chromium bound to niacin, which makes it structurally the closest thing that we have in supplement form to what the body actually is trying to create and use. And that's not just a talking point, that's real clinical researched benefit that unfortunately is overshadowed by the massive amount of money that was poured out by this researcher Evans and the brand Nutrition 21 that is still pushing the narrative that chromium picolinate is the very best. And why are they pushing that narrative? Well, because they have a patent on it and they make money when they market it. Simple as that. Again, chromium picolinate is fine. I don't hate chromium picolinate. I sell it. It's in supplements that we have here at Vitality. It's just not the best one. It's simple as that. Niacin itself is a nutrient that supports insulin sensitivity and healthy lipid metabolism. So you're not just getting better absorbed chromium, you're getting a form that arrives in a biologically familiar package with a cofactor that supports the same metabolic pathways that chromium is already working on. That's the synergy that I talk about a lot when it comes to nutrients. And in this case, bonding that vitamin to that mineral makes the most sense of anything that I've seen. There is a patented version of this called chromate. And chromate research is super solid. Comparable absorption to picolinate in most studies without the concerns about picolinic acid byproducts. And so for meaningful long-term results, I actually like the more physiologically similar form of chromium. And you know what is really cool about this? And it's one of the things that I'm always paying attention to if you listen to me on Vitality Radio, is that because there is not this massive marketing engine behind it, chromium polynicotinate is significantly less expensive, while in my opinion, also being the better form. So let's talk about the 200 microgram problem. This is something that I feel super strongly about. Almost every chromium supplement you'll find on a store shelf in health food stores and grocery stores alike is 200 micrograms per pill. And it says on the back of the bottle to take one per day. That number comes from an adequate intake level established decades ago, meaning RDA. And if you study supplements at all, listen to the show at all, you know, the RDA is not designed to make you optimally healthy. It's designed to keep you from deficiency disease. So 200 micrograms is simply not enough. It never has been enough, yet it is effective. 200 micrograms is an effective dose at helping with this insulin sensitivity thing, at helping with blood sugar and all the things associated with it. But it's not the most effective dose. It's kind of the bottom of the effective range. And I want to talk about the optimal range. There was a landmark study that was published all the way back in 1997. Okay. So we're talking like close to 30 years ago in the journal called Diabetes. It was conducted in China with type 2 diabetic patients, and it compared 200 micrograms per day against 1,000 micrograms per day, 5 times as much. The result at the 1,000 microgram dose were significantly better compared to the 200 microgram in these categories: fasting blood glucose, 2-hour glucose tolerance, insulin levels, and A1C levels. The long-term blood sugar marker that is the one that is kind of the gold standard marker for diabetes. Every single one of those categories, the 1,000 micrograms, were significantly better, even though the 200 microgram group showed modest results. The 1,000 microgram group showed excellent results. That study essentially established that if you want chromium to move the needle metabolically, you really need to be working in a range of at least 500 to 1,000 micrograms per day. And personally, based on the other studies that have been done and based on my own experience with real people using this stuff, 1,000 to 1,500 micrograms is where I always come out as an optimal dose of chromium. Functional nutritional practitioners have, in many cases, moved in that direction. But even those doctors are often behind the 8 ball on this and only recommending 200 micrograms, or maybe they'll recommend 200 micrograms 2 or 3 times a day to get you to 400 to 600. And I just simply don't think it's enough. 1,000 to 1,500 to me is really the gold standard dose. Let's talk about safety, because that's always been the big question. When I have people come in saying, hey, you know, my doc said to take 200 micrograms of chromium, or I was reading this article and it said to take 200 milligrams of chromium. And then I'm talking to them about, let's take a 500 microgram chromium 2 or 3 times a day. People are like, whoa, but you know, is it toxic? So let's talk about that. There is no established tolerable upper intake level for chromium in the United States, meaning no ceiling has actually been set by any regulatory body, because toxicity from dietary or supplemental chromium is considered extremely unlikely. The body excretes what it doesn't use, and accumulation isn't a significant concern in the doses used in practice, even at those higher doses. That said, there are a few things worth knowing. If you're on medications for blood sugar, like metformin, insulin, that type of thing, chromium can enhance their effects. So you want your prescribing physician to be aware that you're on it. And that's not a reason to avoid it. It's just good communication to make sure you're not dropping blood sugar too low. Optimally, you're going to be able to use less of the pharmaceuticals because of the chromium. Now, if you want to use chromium in a meaningful way, then you can use just straight chromium in the polynicotinate form at 500 micrograms 2 to 3 times a day. That's one way that you can do it. It's a very economical supplement. I think that's going to cost you like $6 or $7 a month if you're using 3 a day. So again, very economical. Love this product for that reason. Everything about that just tracks with what I'm trying to accomplish here at Vitality Radio, helping you with really effective things that hopefully in most cases, don't break the bank. I'm certainly happy to bring you products that are expensive if they work, but it's so exciting when there's something that works really, really well that doesn't cost you much money at all. So that's one way you can do it, is just straight chromium. My favorite option, actually, well, I have a couple of good options, but the one that I recommend the most is by Natural Factors. It's a 500 microgram GTF chromium, which I want to clear this up too. If it says GTF chromium on the bottle, then it is almost always chromium bound to niacin. Sometimes it'll actually say nicotinate or polynicotinate, or it'll say GTF chromium chelate. It's basically the same thing, okay? So if you just want to use chromium, that's one way that you can do it. So recently, we introduced our GLP-1 metabolic optimizer formula. This is one that I've been working on for almost 2 years. It's been out for about a month now. As I'm recording this, it's been out for almost 3 weeks, okay? And this formula it's the fastest launch we've ever had of a formula. People have really gotten excited about this product. And we've already started getting some really, really good feedback that I want to share here at the end of this episode. I'll get into that in just a second. But there's 1,000 micrograms of the polynicotinate formula in 3 capsules per day. If you're worried about getting too much, which again, not very easy to get too much chromium, but there's 250 micrograms in the Ultimate Vitality Multi. And I know that a lot of you listening are already using the multivitamin. And so that's why I shot for 1,000 micrograms in the GLP-1 Metabolic Optimizer instead of 1,500 micrograms. So you're getting 1,250 micrograms between the different sources. Other people are also getting chromium from other sources sometimes as well, plus what's in your diet. So I figure that's a pretty good dose, and a dose that I'm very comfortable with as an effective dose. And again, we do use that nicotinate form, a polynicotinate form, which is optimal in my book as far as all of the studies that have been done and what I've seen. Now, as far as results, I've had good results with just chromium for years. Lots of people just taking chromium, getting good results, but it's never like the magic bullet. It's not the thing that takes you from diabetic to pre-diabetic or anything like that. It's very, very supportive. It's absolutely something that you should be considering, if not doing, if you're dealing with any kind of metabolic issues, excess weight, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, higher A1C levels, fasting glucose, any of those types of things that we already talked about. Chromium is awesome. Chromium is inexpensive. It's just kind of a no-brainer. What drives me crazy about formulations on the market with chromium is that almost all of them are formulating with too little. Most of them are putting still 200 micrograms in there. And there's no good reason for it. Like, there's a lot of brands that are putting in too little vitamin K2, for instance, into their formulas, because vitamin K2 is expensive. It bumps the price of the formula up, makes it harder for you to afford, and therefore less likely for them to sell as many bottles as they'd like. Chromium's not like that. It's just kind of goes in the formula. It doesn't take a lot of space, and it doesn't take a lot of money. So it's just companies that are either not educating themselves well enough at the formulation level, or they're counting on you not understanding this information, or recognizing, or having listened to podcasts like this, knowing that you actually need more of it. I don't know what's going on. They may be also just a little nervous about busting the RDA, which you should never be nervous about, because the RDA is almost always kind of a joke when it comes to potencies. All right. So anyway, there's 1,000 micrograms in the GLP-1 formula. Let me tell you my personal results, and I'm going to tell you a few little testimonials we received, because I'm pretty excited about it. So I'm down 9.5 pounds after 16 days on the GLP-1 formula. And what I will tell you is my sugar cravings are dramatically reduced. And it's not just the chromium, because I've used chromium a lot over the years, and it hasn't had that level of effect. Chromium has been beneficial in the past for me, for sure, for blood sugar. And I've had a lot of benefits with other clients of mine. But as I said, on its own, it's not really the needle mover, at least that I needed. So I like it as more part of a synergistic approach. My overall appetite is significantly reduced. And like I said, 9.5 pounds, pretty impressive. And 2% body fat, according to my body fat scale, has dropped. So things are looking really, really good. Now, people are asked, well, how are you eating? Well, I'm eating high protein. I'm eating lower in sugar, lower carbs. But why am I doing that? Well, obviously, I am looking to burn fat. That's why. But how am I doing it is probably the better question, because I've told you, I've confessed on this show, sugar has been my nemesis for, as long as I can remember. My mother and my father, both sugar fiends, and they donated whatever that genetic thing is to me. And I love you, mom and dad, but no thanks on that one, right? So I have had no significant cravings for any of that stuff. It's been amazing. So I've had two gentlemen now come in. One was a little younger than me, probably about 10 years younger than me, and one was around my same age. So, 40s, 50s, and both have told me the exact same thing, almost verbatim. It was kind of wild. I'm not emptying my plate anymore. I am eating half or, a little more of my meal, and then I'm done. I don't need more. I feel satisfied, and I'm not having the cravings that I used to have, and I am losing weight. So those are some testimonials there. I had a woman that's a regular of ours at Vitality Nutrition who also was talking to me the other day, who told me that she's finding appetite and blood sugar are way more stable. She's not having the massive cravings. So we're hearing it all, pretty much the same stuff from different people in different situations. And it's super, super exciting. So in closing, chromium might not be the flashiest mineral on the shelf. It doesn't have the same level of awareness that something like magnesium does. It doesn't nearly get the press that things like magnesium do, at least not anymore. But my gosh, it belongs in the conversation, because metabolically, this is one unhealthy country, and the Western world is really struggling in this department, and chromium makes a ton of sense. So your body depends on it. The research supports a higher dose than maybe you ever thought you should take, and the form that you choose absolutely matters. And that's why I do this show, and I hope this has been helpful. Give us a call, 801-292-6662. If you have questions, visit us at one of our locations. I can't believe we have two now, one in Bountiful. The mothership has been around for almost 49 years, and our brand new one in South Ogden, where the phone number up there, I guess I should share as well, 801-479-9474 if you want to visit us up there. Still known as Healthy Me up there, but we will be changing the signs and everything to Vitality Nutrition very soon. For now, look for the big health food sign, and you can visit us online, vitalitynutrition.com. We'll have all these products linked in the show description. And remember, if you do decide you want to use the GLP-1 metabolic optimizer, I'm requesting that you give it 3 months, because that's where most of the studies really, really shined. Although many of us, including myself, are getting benefits very, very quickly right out of the gate. If you do get 3 months, 3 bottles, you throw those in your cart, you get $10 off each bottle, saving you $30 altogether. Thank you so much for listening to me. My name's Jared St. Clair, and I'll be back with you on the next episode of Vitality Radio. Thanks for listening to the Vitality Radio podcast. If this episode helped you, follow the show, share it with someone, and explore trusted education and resources at vitalitynutrition.com. See you next time.
Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Vitality Radio. Just a reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast has not been evaluated by the FDA. This podcast is provided with the understanding that the information shared is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. This podcast is not a substitute for professional care by a medical professional. Thank you.